After World War I, Churchill wrote a 3-volume memoir of the conflict that won him the Nobel Prize in Literature. The first volume analyzes the world crisis from 1911 to 1914. This wasn't just hindsight on Churchill's part when he became First Lord of the Admiralty in 1911. He had already declared that a great war was inevitable based on the situation in Europe. Many dismissed his prediction. Even those who agreed a war was possible had no idea of its potential scale, let alone the role Tsarist Russia would play. Only Churchill was convinced it would be a world war that would reshape the European order. Churchill threw himself into war preparations with the utmost urgency. He repeatedly stressed to his staff that a German attack was imminent. As soon as he took office, he replaced a number of old, out-of-touch, and ineffective admirals, unafraid of making enemies. He modeled a new naval staff after the Army's General Staff and hung a large map of the North Sea in his office, using small flags to track the movements of the German Navy. He frequently took the royal yacht HMS Enchantress to inspect the fleet. His secretary complained that working for Churchill meant they never even had Sundays off. Churchill fully grasped the role of technology in military power. He ordered new warships to be fitted with 15-inch guns, replacing the standard 13.5-inch artillery. Switching out the Navy's trusted weapons right before a war was a major gamble, to say the least. He also pushed back against all opposition to persuade the cabinet to fuel warships with a new resource: oil. For a major coal-producing nation with no domestic oil reserves, this seemed like a crazy decision. As history would prove, Churchill's two great gambles gave the British Navy a significant advantage in World War I. When Churchill left the Admiralty in 1915, Lord Kitchener, the former Secretary of State for War, told him, "One thing you can always be proud of is that our Navy was completely ready for war." On August 4, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. Churchill's prophecy had come true. He wrote to his wife, not without a touch of pride, "Everything is tending towards catastrophe and collapse. I am interested, geared up and happy. Is it not horrible to be built like that? The preparations have a hideous fascination for me. I pray to God to forgive me for such fearful moods of levity." As the leader of the world's most powerful navy at the start of the war, Churchill was the center of attention. Everyone at the time believed he was the most likely candidate for the next prime minister. However, Churchill's over-the-top confidence would soon lead to his downfall. He dispatched the Royal Marines to support the Belgian defense of Antwerp and even went to the front lines himself, demanding to resign as First Lord of the Admiralty to take command of the city's forces. His request was denied, and Antwerp quickly fell, with 57 British soldiers killed. The expedition turned Churchill into a laughingstock. Convinced he had done nothing wrong, he repeatedly offered his resignation, eager to find a command on the front lines, a testament to his deep desire for battlefield glory. In January 1915, Churchill approved a naval plan to seize the Dardanelles. Naval commanders widely believed that the Navy alone could not accomplish this mission and that a joint operation with the Army was essential. But Lord Kitchener, the Secretary of State for War, was reluctant to commit troops immediately. Impatient and unwilling to share the potential glory with anyone, Churchill sent the Navy in without bothering to persuade the Army. An Australian historian later commented, "Churchill was a bombastic amateur when it came to artillery, but his youthful, infectious enthusiasm won over the slower minds of the older generation, leading directly to the tragedy at Gallipoli." Britain was bogged down in the Dardanelles. Casualties killed, captured, missing, and dead from disease reached 43,000, severely damaging the prestige Britain had built up in the early days of the war. Both the Prime Minister and the War Office were responsible for the disaster, but they shifted all the blame onto Churchill. His consistently aggressive management style had made him enemies on all sides, and at this critical moment, no one spoke up for him. In May 1915, Prime Minister Asquith removed Churchill from his post as First Lord of the Admiralty, giving him the title of Minister without portfolio, a cabinet position with no specific department to run, which meant no real work but a hefty salary. In November 1915, Churchill resigned in a fit of pique and enlisted to fight in France. As his family saw him off, they were all in tears except for his wife, who shared his sense of purpose. She knew better than anyone that going to the front was Churchill's dream. Even dying in battle was better than being sidelined at home. Churchill became a battalion commander. At first, the soldiers, wary of politicians, were skeptical. But Churchill led from the front in every way, even lending out his personal bathtub so his men could wash and get rid of lice. He quickly won their respect. When high-ranking officials passed through the war zone, they would often visit him. Churchill would deliberately take them on tours of the trenches, and his soldiers would cheer whenever the officials' fine clothes were snagged on barbed wire or their polished shoes caked in mud. Churchill couldn't shake his love for the spotlight. He even designed his own uniform, combining the best features of British and French styles. He often ordered his men to open fire at night just to unnerve the Germans, which kept Allied units from getting any sleep. When his soldiers complained he was too restless, Churchill asked a rifleman in the trenches, "Don't you enjoy the war?" In June 1916, Churchill left the army and returned to politics. In 1917, the new Prime Minister, Lloyd George, went against strong opposition to appoint him Minister of Munitions. Critics called Churchill a dangerous genius who could bring everyone down with him if he failed. In his memoirs, Lloyd George wrote, "His fertile mind and boundless energy would be an invaluable asset as long as his actions could be supervised in times of great peril. It is essential to make full use of such men. If they are handled with vigilance, their individual contributions will far outweigh those of a whole host of mediocrities." Lloyd George's judgment proved astute. Churchill pushed for the mass production of tanks and the creation of armored corps. At the time, this new weapon was not highly regarded by any nation, but Churchill's sharp insight and determination once again gave Britain a technological edge. On the evening of November 11, 1918, when Germany signed the armistice, Churchill was having dinner with Lloyd George at 10 Downing Street. The streets were filled with cheers, but Churchill was worried. In his view, although Germany had been defeated, a new and more terrifying enemy was on the rise: Russia after the October Revolution. From that moment on, he became a staunch anti-communist. He called the Bolsheviks ferocious baboons, and his new strategy was to strangle Bolshevism at its birth and kiss the Germans. He surely could not have imagined that, 30 years later, he would be kissing the Bolsheviks to defeat the Germans. While all of Europe was engulfed in the flames of World War I, a 35-year-old Stalin was battling the harsh elements in Siberia. The Romanov dynasty had recently celebrated its 300th anniversary, but Stalin, an exile in the frozen wasteland, could only stare into the distance. He had no way of knowing that the seeds of hope had already been planted. The war that began in 1914 had shaken the empire to its foundations. This was his final trial. If he could survive it, he was destined to become a historic figure. As a revolutionary, his alias at the time was Koba. Koba was a Georgian Robin Hood who killed the rich to give to the poor, the hero of a novel Stalin loved as a boy. The book's title was telling: The Patricide. This southerner from Georgia was no stranger to Siberia. Exile was a regular part of his life. Between 1902 and 1913, Stalin was arrested at least 8 times and escaped from exile 6 times. According to Russian biographer Dmitry Volkogonov, his years in the underground and multiple exiles made Stalin's personality increasingly stubborn and grim. His comrades often praised Koba for his iron will. It was then that he began using the pen name Stalin, which means man of steel. Among the warring nations, Russia had the longest front. The fighting took place over 50,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, leaving 3 million refugees homeless. In 1917, just as his sentence was about to end, the February Revolution erupted, and the Tsar was overthrown. In late March 1917, Lenin was preparing to return from Switzerland. In April, his train crossed the Russian border. Stalin quickly fell in line behind Lenin, using his excellent writing skills to publish a stream of articles explaining Lenin's ideas in the newspapers. Lenin valued his propaganda talent and personally nominated Stalin to the party's Central Committee. In May 1917, Koba Stalin became a member of the First Politburo, standing alongside Lenin, Zinoviev, and Kamenev as one of the 4 main leaders of the Bolsheviks. The marathon of war had become unbearable for Russia's soldiers and civilians. Troops at the front were desperate to go home, but the bourgeois provisional government demanded they fight to the end. In contrast, the Bolsheviks' slogans of peace and land were wildly popular. By the fall of 1917, Lenin felt the time was ripe for an armed uprising. The Bolsheviks first seized power in the Soviets, and Lenin formed the Politburo to lead the insurrection, with Stalin among its members. In the days before the uprising, Lenin stayed away from the Smolny Institute to avoid police attention. Stalin's job was to act as a messenger between Lenin and the Smolny. If the uprising failed, Stalin was also responsible for ensuring Lenin's safe escape. The joy of the October Revolution was short-lived. The nascent socialist state was soon besieged by imperialist powers. Peace had been the Bolsheviks' most inspiring promise, but now all of Russia was a battlefield, and the slogan became everything for the front. The cities faced an unprecedented food crisis. In May 1918, Stalin was appointed head of food procurement for southern Russia and sent to Tsaritsyn to requisition grain. His highly efficient methods saved the Soviet government from immediate collapse. When Tsaritsyn was surrounded, Stalin took on military command. His actions in requisitioning grain and defending the city gave him his first real taste of political prominence. While he had been a minor follower during the October Revolution, the brutal Stalin showed his true colors during the 3-year civil war that followed. It was only when Lenin appointed the organizationally skilled Stalin as the party's general secretary that Koba left Siberia behind for good. He had a new name, Joseph Stalin. In 1913, a young Franklin D. Roosevelt, then in his early 30s, became Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He was physically robust and strikingly handsome. A young naval leader taking office just as a world war was breaking out, how could he not be eager for action? However, isolationism was a long-standing American tradition, and the sitting president, Woodrow Wilson, had made peace and neutrality the cornerstone of his platform to win voter support. In August 1914, Wilson issued a proclamation of neutrality, stating the U.S. government's official position. Roosevelt was deeply dissatisfied. He repeatedly urged the president to establish a National Defense Council, build up military equipment, and even proposed universal military service to increase the number of active duty soldiers and prepare for war. Wilson rejected his advice. So Roosevelt took matters into his own hands, quietly building up the Navy's manpower and supplies and using officer training sessions as an opportunity to encourage joining the war. For 3 years, from 1915 to 1917, Roosevelt worked tirelessly to reverse the tide of pacifism. His chance came in early 1917. The German Navy, finding itself on the defensive, began a campaign of unrestricted submarine warfare, attacking all ships, including those from neutral countries. With his back against the wall, Wilson had no choice but to recall the U.S. ambassador to Germany and sever diplomatic ties. In April, the Senate and House passed a resolution declaring war on Germany. With World War I nearing its end, the United States had finally joined the party. Roosevelt proposed laying a minefield between Scotland and Norway, a route German submarines had to pass through. Due to the enormous cost, both Britain and Norway thought the Americans were meddling and refused to cooperate. Under constant pressure from Roosevelt, work on the minefield finally began in the spring of 1918. The project was not yet complete when the war ended, but it did manage to sink several German submarines. It's worth noting that Franklin Roosevelt's distant cousin, former President Theodore Roosevelt, was also a staunch advocate for entering the war. He sent all 4 of his sons to fight in World War I. The youngest was killed on a flight mission. Theodore urged Franklin to resign and enlist, and Franklin was indeed eager to experience combat firsthand. But the Navy Department refused to let its capable assistant secretary go. To make up for it, Franklin Roosevelt secured an opportunity to represent the U.S. Navy on a tour of the Allied nations to discuss military strategy and inspect American fleets abroad, allowing him to get a taste of the action. In July 1918, Roosevelt got his wish and traveled to the front lines at Dunkirk, where the fighting was most intense. Along the way, he was thrilled by every minor skirmish. When a naval officer tried to lead him on a detour to avoid a combat zone for his safety, Roosevelt flew into a rage. The trip to Europe solidified Roosevelt's desire to serve in the military. Unfortunately, his body didn't cooperate. On the voyage home, he contracted a severe case of pneumonia and had to be carried off the ship on a stretcher when he arrived in New York. By the time he recovered more than a month later, there wasn't much fighting left to do. Missing out on combat was a lifelong regret for Roosevelt. Later, when his alma mater, Groton School, was preparing a monument for alumni who served in World War I, Roosevelt wrote to the person in charge, "Although I was not formally enlisted, I believe my name should be on the list of the first to serve. I inspected the service of others in Europe and personally directed the Navy's combat operations from the front lines." After much lobbying, Roosevelt finally got his name on the monument. The years from 1914 to 1918 were a nightmare for Europe, but a golden age for America. The war transformed the United States, elevating it to the world's leading economic power. It also transformed Roosevelt, marking the first step on his path to becoming president and commander-in-chief. Although he would soon be confined to a wheelchair, destined never to see a battlefield again, that would not stop him from becoming one of history's most celebrated wartime presidents. Like his country, Roosevelt was riding high, with a boundless future ahead. Biographer Conrad Black argues that Franklin inherited his cousin's fighting instincts and his aversion to appeasement. From Wilson, he learned how to patiently cultivate a nation's spiritual strength. His rich personality added a great deal of brilliant color to his political career, a quality rarely seen in leaders. 25 years later, this combination of idealism and versatile talent would save American civilization. In fact, people believe that these qualities in Franklin Roosevelt had already begun to show their effect as early as 1917. In October 1918, the defiant 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment was hit by a British mustard gas attack. Many soldiers who carelessly removed their gas masks died instantly. The survivors, nearly all blinded, stumbled and clung to each other as they made their way to a first aid station. Among them was a 29-year-old corporal named Adolf Hitler. For this young Austrian, life always seemed to find a new low. The fever, swelling, and excruciating pain were torture, making his previous life as a struggling artist who couldn't sell a single painting seem almost pleasant. After several weeks of treatment, his eyesight gradually returned. From that point on, light began to favor him, and he would repay the world with darkness. In August 1914, when news that the Kaiser had declared war on Russia reached Munich, a destitute Hitler joined the cheering crowds in front of the Feldherrn Hall. He later wrote in Mein Kampf, "Even today I am not ashamed to say that, overwhelmed by delirious enthusiasm, I fell on my knees and thanked heaven from an overflowing heart for granting me the good fortune of being permitted to live at this time." Just over 6 months earlier, he had been hauled by police to the Austrian consulate, nearly charged with fleeing the country to evade military service. But when the authorities saw his scrawny frame, they took pity on him. A medical exam declared the young artist too weak to carry a rifle, and he was released. Hitler was pleased that the summons had listed his profession as painter. It wasn't that he was against military service, on the contrary. He was waiting for a better opportunity to enlist. He didn't want to fight for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he wanted to fight for the pure German race. The war fever sweeping Germany stirred Hitler, who had dreamed of a greater Germany since childhood. On August 3rd, he wrote a letter to King Ludwig III of Bavaria, requesting permission to join his army. Hitler actually received a reply and was accepted into the 1st Bavarian Infantry Regiment. This was tremendous news for him. For one, he wouldn't have to serve in the Austrian army he despised. For another, he no longer had to worry about food or clothing for the coming winter. His only fear was not that the war would last too long, but that it would end before he saw any real action. After intensive training, Hitler's first major engagement was the First Battle of Ypres, which began in October 1914. German casualties in the battle reached 130,000, while the Allies lost over 100,000. According to Hitler, by mid-November, the 16th Infantry Regiment was down to just 30 officers and less than 700 men. Only a fifth of the original soldiers survived. Yet orders to attack kept coming. Hitler served as a dispatch runner, a courier who delivered orders through the line of fire. In his spare time, he would pore over maps, and he often knew routes by heart, leaving his comrades in the dust. For his bravery and dedication, and for saving his regimental commander's life under fire, Hitler was awarded the Iron Cross, 2nd class. In the early summer of 1916, Hitler's regiment was transferred south and took part in the famous Battle of the Somme. 3 months into the battle, he was wounded in the abdomen by shrapnel. In recent years, British media have reported on a statement from a German army medic who treated Hitler, confirming that this injury cost him a testicle. During World War II, a popular Allied song mocked Hitler for having only one testicle, but before the medic's account was revealed, historians generally believed it was unsubstantiated Allied propaganda. In the first half of 1918, Hitler's regiment participated in the spring offensive on the Somme and the Marne. In June, Hitler single-handedly captured 4 French soldiers and was awarded the Iron Cross, first class, for his actions. Over 4 years, despite his low rank, Adolf Hitler compiled an impressive combat record. He also received the following awards: the Military Merit Cross, 3rd class with swords on September 17, 1917, a regimental diploma for exceptional bravery on May 9, 1918, a wound badge on May 18, 1918, and a service award, 3rd class, on August 25, 1918. Just as Hitler's blood was boiling for the fight, the tide turned against the German army. Rebellion was brewing at home, and soldiers were desperate to return. Hitler despised the pacifists. When a comrade remarked that it was foolish to continue the war, he flew into a rage and started a fistfight. He swore he would get revenge on the traitors who had betrayed the war effort. In October 1918, the gas attack forced the battle-hungry Hitler to finally leave the field. Of all the major leaders of World War II, none was shaped by the First World War as profoundly as Hitler. He once said, "As for the problems of life, those 4 years of war were the equivalent of 30 years of university training." In November 1914, as ambitious young men across Europe were taking up arms to win glory, Benito Mussolini founded the newspaper Il Popolo d'Italia, the people of Italy, choosing to fight with the weapon he wielded best: his pen. As a socialist, Mussolini's views diverged from those of his comrades. He advocated for entering the war, arguing that it would pave the way for a socialist revolution. For this, he was expelled from the Italian Socialist Party. However, Mussolini's arguments were popular among the younger generation of intellectuals, and his powerful, charismatic writing style made him appear a leader among his peers. In May 1915, Italy finally declared war on Austria-Hungary. Mussolini, who had been a vocal proponent of the war, was surprisingly not eager to enlist. In reality, he preferred to direct the war from his editor's desk. That September, he was drafted. At the time, he believed it would be a quick, Garibaldi-style victory, so despite his reluctance, he went off to war with a sense of optimism. Little did he know that Italy was stepping into a quagmire from which it could not escape. In his 2.5 years as a soldier, Mussolini accomplished almost nothing of note. However, after becoming famous, he loved to reminisce about his glorious past, telling tales of the dangers he faced and the courage and wit he displayed in the Great War. In February 1917, a mortar he was operating exploded from overheating, killing several men. Mussolini himself was hit by over 40 pieces of shrapnel, though none in a vital area. This became Mussolini's favorite war story, an incident he called the luckiest moment of my life. He claimed he was so fearless that he refused anesthesia while the shrapnel was being removed. Later, his followers would emulate this brand of hyperbole, with thousands claiming to have been the one who carried Mussolini to the hospital. After his injury, Mussolini was discharged and returned to Il Popolo d'Italia, where his colleagues had already published lengthy articles about his heroic deeds, hailing him as a successor to Garibaldi. He was already planning to organize the men back from the trenches into a new political force. In March 1919, in Milan, Mussolini founded the Fasci di Combattimento fighting leagues, which would evolve into the National Fascist Party 2 years later. In 1923, the official Fascist Party press published Mussolini's war diary. Much of it was fabricated, but it undoubtedly boosted his prestige. In the spring of 1915, Hideki Tojo, who came from a family of military officers, graduated from Japan's Army War College. He was already 31 years old. Graduates were typically posted to Europe, and Tojo, who specialized in German, was considered pro-German. Because the World War had made Germany an enemy nation, he couldn't study there. Instead, he was temporarily assigned as a company commander at the military academy before being transferred to the adjutant's department in 1916. At the time, Kenichi Oshima was the minister of the army, and Kameji Wada was the senior adjutant. Tojo, working under Wada, developed his skills quickly. He was known for being exceptionally diligent and reliable, and it was said his reputation in military and political circles as a pragmatist originated from his work style during this period. Just before Tojo was transferred from his post, Kameji Wada offered him a piece of advice: try to be more open-minded. Hideki Tojo, later known as the Razor, was absent from the First World War. For him, the experiences that came just after the war ended were far more influential. After the war, Tojo could finally travel to Europe as originally planned, a trip he had long awaited. In August 1919, he was sent to Switzerland and Germany as a military researcher, tasked with gathering intelligence and studying the military, political, economic, and cultural conditions of European nations. In Europe, Tojo met and formed a small group with other young officers like Tetsuzan Nagata, Toshiro Obata, and Yasuji Okamura, who held regular meetings. World War I taught Tojo and his contemporaries that modern warfare required massive national mobilization plans, the largest possible scale of material supply, a nation in arms, and total war. They realized that civilians and private industry also had to be organized and centrally managed. They pledged to work together upon their return to Japan to reform the military system, overhaul personnel, and establish a framework for total mobilization. This secret military society became known as the Isekikai One Evening Society, and its core members would later become key figures in the Japanese invasion of China.